So I think the rankings are a good start for people who are unfamiliar with a different school. But rankings, as you suggested, don't tell the whole story. So it really starts individually. So if a student thinks that they will be better in a smaller community, they're used to maybe a small private school with only 80 students per grade, then going to a giant university like Indiana University or University of Florida, more like the size of a Chinese university, is going to be unfamiliar to them and going to be a transition. So the student really has to understand what type of learning environment they want. Not less important, but second most important point is that the student needs to find schools that have strength in the areas of their interest. So if a student is interested in studying psychology, they first have to make sure that the school has a psychology major or a psychology department, and then have to see what specific research interests do some of the professors there have, what opportunities do they have to work with those professors, what practical experience can they get as a result of that. So those are some of the preliminary steps that you would research. The first suggestion is if you are a younger student and you don't have standardized test scores, it's good to kind of dream of the Ivy League and have that as a goal, but you shouldn't be picking schools based on ranks. You shouldn't have that preset idea, because you have to do research about the schools that'll fit your interest, your personality, and your learning style. And that's the first step. But as far as general advice for students who are seeking admission to top schools, especially international students, my advice is to start as early as possible. Now, I wouldn't start actually strategizing your admission prior to entering high school. However, in the case of Chinese students, you want to make sure things are the baseline for that beforehand are in place. Your English competency, language proficiency, if you could have the ability to score very high in the TOEFL, converse and learn in English, experience in the US, those are all preliminary steps that you can get out of the way before high school, and that'll set you up to be all the more competitive. You know, most high school curriculums, there's AP and IB and A-level and all those things, but most students are taking the same subjects. So extracurriculars are where a student shows their interest and their personality and how that gets reflected in the application. Now the problem is that if students emphasize a collective identity, and if my parents said, David, you should do this because your neighbor's doing this and he's really smart. That seems to be a lot of the attitude that I see here. And I see it in the United States as well, that people are doing things because they seem like they're good for college. They'll do a community service trip to Africa or to Tibet without real thought into why that is something that would be uniquely helpful to their candidacy. It just seems like, oh, I've heard this is a good thing for college and a lot of people do it. And that, for Chinese students especially, is really a death blow to an application. If you look like everyone else on paper and you have 100 or 200,000 competitors on paper, you're just going to be thrown into the trash as an applicant. And so unique opportunities are ones that are individualized and customized. So for instance, we had a student who was interested in psychology and business, and we set him up with a professor from NYU Stern to do a study that combined the two disciplines, so combined psychology and business. And at the end of it, the student got a letter of recommendation from that professor, which can carry a lot of weight in the admissions office. My experience, my primary activity or extracurricular activity was policy debate. So to stand out, you truly have to be internationally or nationally competitive. You have to be the #1 or #5 student ranked. I had other extracurricular activities. I was on sports teams, I did student government, student newspaper. Debate was my main focus on my college application. I think a very important difference is that we are not agents, we view ourselves as educators. And so the end goal is that when students work with us over the span of 3 or 4 years, even if they are to not get the results that they want, and obviously we do our best to make sure they get the results they want, we want them to feel like they had a fantastic education over those 3 or 4 years, that we linked them to incredible opportunities for their own advancement and their own education that will serve them well in college and beyond college in their careers. And that to us is the marker of a great company. In terms of more results-oriented ideas about looking at results lists of where our students have gotten in, we're more interested in what we were able to do for a student who was hardworking and who took advantage of those opportunities than we are in bragging about how many students we got into Princeton or Harvard or Stanford in a given year. every one of our students works one-on-one with a former admissions officer. The former admissions officers are really the most direct source of knowledge, and that's what we want to link our students with, so that they understand what different students look like to admissions offices on paper and how to impress them. The best thing that parents can do is have a thorough understanding of American educational values. Because if your goal is to go study in the United States, especially at top universities, even if you might disagree with some of those values, if you want to go there, you need to embody those values as an applicant. And so the parents who support their kids in exploring different interests, which might not be very common in China or might not be the most marketable in terms of careers in China, allowing students to have that flexibility at a younger age will be incredibly important in allowing them to have the freedom to choose and the freedom to develop their own identity. You know, the parents that kind of force a certain idea down their kid's throat, like, okay, you're going to go to business school, or you're definitely going to do this. Those students feel a pressure to follow that path, and they might not be happy in it, they might not like it, and if those two things are true, they're not going to be good at it, and they're not going to beat out the students who really are.